Welcome back to another episode of Antique Overland. This time we're going to take a look at the history of recreation magazines. This is something I've wanted to do for a while, but the topic is so vast that I found it difficult to shrink it down into something more concise. If you've watched any of our other videos, you know that we spend a lot of time on research, and that I'm a stickler for using primary sources whenever possible. While magazines can fall under both types of source material, they make up a large percentage of our research materials in general. I have several reasons for relying on them. The combination of the obvious being articles and advertisements is pretty high on my list, but the context with which these magazines were published is also pretty relevant. It's impossible to cover the histories of all the early publications in this video, so I want to explore a few of the earliest ones, so let's get started. To give you some greater context, the first magazine, as you and I would understand it, was published for just 3 months beginning in 1741, entitled American Magazine, and published by Andrew Bradford. Bradford was immediately in competition with none other than Benjamin Franklin, whose publication, The General Magazine, came out just 3 days after Bradford's. While neither Bradford's nor Franklin's periodicals lasted, Americans had a taste for the magazine, and as George Washington noted in a letter to Philadelphia printer Matthew Carey, I consider such vehicles of knowledge more happily calculated than any other to preserve the liberty, stimulate the industry, and ameliorate the morals of an enlightened and free people. I believe his words still hold water. So let's jump in then and take a look at some of the earliest recreation-focused magazines. The earliest recreation magazine was actually more like a newsletter or weekly journal in format than what we would consider a magazine, even by mid-19th century standards. First published in 1831, The Spirit of the Times was recognized as the nation's premier sporting paper of the century. Its editor, William T. Porter, targeted a largely affluent readership with articles focused primarily on agriculture, horse racing, field sports, aquatic sports, and theater critiques, alongside general literature. By the time Porter edited The Spirit of the Times, he had already developed quite a reputation in the magazine and general publishing industry, with his work as both editor and publisher of books and periodicals, mostly on horse racing. By the 1850s, The Spirit of the Times had grown the topics it covered to include angling, reported to be Porter's personal passion, baseball, cricket, foot racing, fox hunting, horse racing, yachting, rowing, and boxing. Along with articles came statistics and trivia, which furthered the publication's reputation as America's leading sporting publication. Porter ran his paper until 1856, when he parted ways with his publisher, John Richards, to whom he surrendered ownership of the magazine. Porter went on to edit and publish alongside new partner John Wilkes, Porter's Spirit of the Times, until his death in 1858 of consumption, at which time Porter's share of the magazine evidently went to his attorney, and Wilkes broke up the partnership, preferring to go out on his own and publish Wilkes' Spirit of the Times, which he ran until it folded in 1892, the last of the 3 Spirit publications. Then came Forest and Stream, the first publication truly devoted to wildlife conservation and the outdoor sporting lifestyle. Published by Charles Halleck beginning in 1873 and running continuously until 1930, when it merged with its competitor, Field and Stream. It had been the 9th oldest publication in the United States at that point. Forest and Stream is, in my opinion, the first publication that really sheds light on our period and all the attributes of what we've come to call classic camping. Halleck, alongside his editor George W. Sears, known more for his pen name, Nessmuk, filled Forest and Stream's pages with the writings of naturalist George Bird Grinnell, who would later edit the publication, conservationist Theodore Roosevelt, Dr. James Alexander Henschel, prominent bass angler, author, and inventor in the field of hatchery management, Martin Elmer Johnson and his wife Osa, American adventurers and documentarians, James L. Clark, explorer, sculptor, photographer, and taxidermist for the American Museum of Natural History, and Theodore Gordon, author and father of American dry fly fishing, and the developer of the Catskill style of dry flies. At its core, Forest and Stream was a voice for the conservation movement. beginning around 1890 with Forest and Stream's naturalist author George Grinnell, who had been enamored with John James Audubon since his youth, and personally concerned with avian conservation. Grinnell established the first iteration of the Audubon Society in Chicago. His society eventually boasted nearly 49,000 members, but it wasn't enough to make a substantive change. His pledge to protect birds was only accepted by so many, and at that, mostly by his members, as prominent members of the American Ornithologists Union spoke out against him on the basis of species collection. An argument that went back to the early 1880s. What seems to have amounted to a division in ideology with regards to the conservation efforts resulted in the failure of the first iteration of the Audubon Society. The one we know today traces its roots to the rebuilt society in 1895. Forest and Stream didn't just stop with their support for the Audubon Society when it came to conservation. They pushed for the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, MBTA, of 1918, which was meant to replace the Weeks-McLean Act of 1913, which had previously prohibited the spring hunting and marketing of migratory birds, as well as what was deemed millinery murder. In other words, using wild bird feathers for women's fashion. The MBTA took things even further. The act, which was, at the time between the United States and Canada, made it illegal to pursue, hunt, capture, kill, or sell over 1,000 different species of migratory birds. Updates, provisions, and exclusions have been added or amended in the decades since. Further conservation efforts, especially on behalf of public lands, were likewise advocated for in the pages of Forest and Stream. In what has been loosely termed the birth of conservation journalism, Forest and Stream began promoting what Grinnell termed the gospel of conservation, and with it, their push to turn the modern sportsman into the preeminent conservationist, turning hunters and anglers into the backbone of their push for public lands through the creation of the National Park Service. Finally, conservation had a platform, and the followers to spread the word of regulated hunting seasons, habitat preservation, and catch limits on fishing, thereby preserving wildlife and lands and ensuring outdoor adventure for generations. Their efforts paid off, and in the 1880s through the 1890s, they spearheaded the fight against poaching in Yellowstone and brought the uninhibited slaughter of wildlife to the public arena. The subsequent public outcry forced Congress to step in and specifically protect Yellowstone's wildlife. Today, the heritage of Forest and Stream lives on in the legacy of its turn-of-the-century counterpart. Acquired in 1930 by its largest direct competitor, Field and Stream, originally founded in 1895 by John P. Burkhardt and Henry Wellington Wack, Field and Stream at one time boasted a list of more than 1 million subscribers, and was edited from 1910 to 1918 by none other than avid outdoorsman and author Warren Hastings Miller. While Field and Stream is no longer an in-print magazine, it has retained much of its original identity in the articles it publishes on the outdoor lifestyle, equipment, and conservation. Rather ironically, however, it does list its founding date as 1871, which is a little arguable and only based on the dates of its preceding competitor, Forest and Stream. The third oldest American recreation-based magazine was entitled Outing, or sometimes The Outing Magazine, and unlike its contemporaries, had the least to do with what we would understand as outdoor sporting, at least initially. Outing, first published in 1882, was initially focused on cycling, even to the point that it was first published under the title The Wheelman. In truth, it went through 4 title changes before it ceased production in 1923, but that's neither here nor there. The Wheelman was the literary arm of the Pope Manufacturing Company, founded in 1876 by Colonel Albert Pope, manufacturer of bicycles, namely the Columbia, which is still in production today under the brand Columbia Bicycles, a subsidiary of Ballard Pacific. He produced automobiles until 1915 and motorcycles until 1918. Pope was personally involved in his growing concern, at least enough to hire Samuel Sidney McClure, an Irish immigrant to Indiana who, in 1881, had been the editor-in-chief of his student newspaper at Knox College. Pope had advertised in the paper, and he initially hired McClure to work in his bicycle rink as an instructor. Writing was growing exponentially in popularity in the 1880s, and Pope finally decided he needed a cycling-based magazine to accompany his growing concern. McClure was eager for the position, and together with fellow Knox classmate John Sanborn Phillips, became a co-editor. McClure and Phillips would, by 1884, along with some of McClure's extended family, open the first American syndicate. McClure Newspaper Syndicate. By 1885, McClure had left the Wheelman, or outing, and it had become more generally focused on outdoor recreation, having by that point begun to include canoeing, hunting, fishing, and adventure literature. Before Outing ceased publication in 1923, it had attracted several noted foundational outdoor authors, such as Horace Kephart, O.W. Smith, who shaped angling literature in the 20th century, wilderness authors and adventurers Robert and Catherine Pinkerton, and Edward Crossman, the father of the American small-bore rifle competition. In many ways, the history of recreation magazines mirrors the evolution of America's relationship with the outdoors itself. What began as sporting papers aimed largely at affluent readers gradually transformed into powerful cultural voices that shaped attitudes towards recreation, wilderness, conservation, and adventure. Publications like The Spirit of the Times, Forest and Stream, and Outing did far more than report on hunting trips, fishing techniques, cycling, or camping. They created communities of readers who shared a growing appreciation for the natural world and the experiences it offered. These magazines preserved the stories, ideas, equipment, and philosophies of their eras, while simultaneously influencing the future of outdoor recreation. Through their pages emerged some of the earliest organized calls for wildlife conservation, public land protection, ethical sporting practices, and environmental stewardship. They also helped define what we now recognize as the classic outdoor lifestyle, one centered on exploration, self-reliance, leisure travel, and a deeper connection to nature. For researchers, historians, and enthusiasts alike, these publications remain invaluable primary sources. Beyond their articles and advertisements, they provide a context, a window into the values, aspirations, and social changes of the people who read them. Whether discussing a canoe trip, a new bicycle design, a fishing technique, or the protection of Yellowstone, these magazines captured the spirit of their time in a way few other sources could. Even though many of these publications no longer exist in print, their legacy continues to influence modern outdoor media, conservation efforts, and recreation culture today. Every contemporary camping magazine, outdoor blog, conservation campaign, or recreation brand owes at least a small debt to these early pioneers of sporting journalism. And for those of us interested in antique overlanding and classic camping, they remain one of the richest sources for understanding not only how people traveled and recreated, but why the outdoors became such an enduring part of the American identity. Thanks for watching another episode of Antique Overland. We hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, remember to click the like button, share, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos. Thanks, bye.